Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Dawn Breen, and I am the acting chief curator of the Frick Pittsburgh, and it is my pleasure to introduce our guest this evening. I am speaking to you tonight from the ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. As a place of history and culture, the Frick recognizes the cultural importance of land and the role of cultural institutions in the formation of collective memory. Displacement and erasure are not just histories for Native peoples. Land acknowledgements, like historic sites themselves, are exercises in preservation and reconciliation engaged with past, present, and future. A few logistics before we begin. We are offering closed captioning for tonight's program, which you can find at the bottom of your screen if you toggle down to the little CC live transcript. The conversation is being recorded and will be available after, and there will be a Q&A session after the conversation. So please use the chat to submit comments and questions throughout, and we will be monitoring them, and we will try our best to get to everyone's before the end. And if you have any tech issues, please put those in the chat as well, and we will do our best to help you. It is my tremendous honor to introduce our two esteemed speakers this evening. Vanessa German is a nationally celebrated citizen artist whose Homewood studio is just blocks away from the Frick. We are immensely grateful to be hosting her for a 3-year artist in residency. Her powerful, multi-sensory installation, Reckoning, Grief and Light, Nothing Can Separate You from the Language You Cry In, opened at the Frick Art Museum last month. 3 stunning altarpieces, created as reckoning works and ingredients of social healing, offer an homage to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and the countless other souls we have lost to state-sanctioned police violence. Installed among the Italian Renaissance paintings, Vanessa's installation offers a compelling meditation on grief and healing. The soundtrack to her installation, which you heard as we began this program, is a recording of the debut performance of And Buried, Unmourned, Unmarked, Requiem for Rice, which is a contemporary symphonic performance that mourns the souls of enslaved Africans and people of African descent on Low Country, South Carolina, and Georgia rice plantations. And it features music by the Emmy Award-winning composer John Weinglass, and the work is based on a libretto written by our second guest this evening, acclaimed historian Dr. Edda Fields-Black, who is Associate Professor of History at Carnegie Mellon University. She is the creative force behind the work, and she served as executive producer, or as she self-described it, fundraiser and connector in chief. And the libretto is based on primary historical sources and her research. The Colored Music Festival debuted the symphony at Carnegie Music Hall in Oakland in 2019. And tonight, Vanessa and Edda will lead us in a conversation about grief and what bell hooks, author, feminist, and social activist described as the theory of liberatory practice. The power of creative engagement, of theorizing and responding to our pain. A response takes place in the mind and heart, and yes, in the community as well. Vanessa and Edda, thank you both so much for being here. I'm looking forward to your conversation.
It is wonderful to be here with you. Thank you, Dawn, for that thorough and glistening introduction. That was beautiful.
Thank you,
Dr.
Dawn.
Black.
Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
I am so good. It is really wonderful to be with you. I love talking to you. I love being in conversation with you in your kitchen, at a restaurant, at a park. I don't care. Because it's always, you're one of the most magical people I know.
Oh my goodness.
So completely, the light runs so thoroughly through you that it is active and affirmed in everything that you do. And I just want to be around that. I just want to be able to be in proximity to that, because it awakens that truth up inside of me. Like you speak to the ancestors inside of me and bring them awake in ways that I always, when I'm with you, I can feel it's necessary, especially when we first started to have conversations. I would feel this thing around you. I would feel a calling around you. I would feel something wanting to wake up and speak inside of me, that that it's something that like nobody else can give you permission to, you know what I mean? It's like I couldn't have gone to school and felt that it came in proximity to everything that is alive and awake inside of you. And you're so powerful. So I'm really glad to be here with you tonight.
Thank you, Vanessa. That is so beautiful. And, you know, I remember the first days when we started sitting down in your kitchen, in my kitchen, in the park, in many different places. And I felt the same awakening. You know, I felt very much as if there were ways that I was asleep and did not know. And I came to you looking for that spark, you know, and really looking for the courage to do what I really was called to do. And you gave it to me then, and you give it to me each time we're together, and it's just so beautiful, and it's so amazing, and it's just really very special to me and very sacred.
It is. I experience that sacredness in our conversations and our time together. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you feel called?
I don't know if I would have described it as called. I feel touched.
Mm.
I feel as
You
if
are touched.
I was touched by the ancestors.
Yes. You know what's interesting? Did you grow up with people who use that phrase? Touch?
Yes.
I did too. My dad, and it was always a little sort of, I always took it as a little slight, because I would do something, you know, I'm so strange, and I have been strange and recognized myself as like on the outside of a lot of things my whole life. But my father would sort of see me do something or hear me say something, and he would lean back, he'd be like, "You touched." And then my grandmother, who's from Louisiana, she would say, "Touched. You touched, you touched." And but now I feel it and experience it in a way that is sacred and that is resonant in the same sort of feeling place as having a calling and being called. And I, you know, thinking about this conversation tonight and thinking about grief and light and love and creativity and how we make spaces for ourselves as Black people, as Africans in America, in this world, to be whole and to be really alive. I wonder if you can tell me, in your background, with all the things that you've studied, how you contend with the grief of knowing what you know and knowing the stories that you carry, which are, you know, you're a rare carrier. You carry so many of our stories, and you carry so many connections inside of you. And I think about how you teach that course on the transatlantic slave trade, and how my mother refused to talk about the Middle Passage. Like she would just say, "No, I can't talk about that. I won't do that." And that let me know, from my mother, who was the size of a mountain and so creative and so filled with light, that it was so heavy. And I want to know how you hold that, and what was it like for you to study it? What was it like for you to learn things that you didn't learn in high school, and then have to live with that, and then teach it to people who might not experience it soulfully even?
It's interesting, as I look back on our time together, we've we've talked a lot about this over the years. I still wonder if I have a good answer. I recognize that as I was trained as a graduate student, even though slavery was one of my fields. I read a lot about slavery. And certainly it was part of the courses I studied. But I will have to say that in my work in West Africa, I really wanted nothing to do with it. I tried to go back as far before the transatlantic slave trade as I could, and I tried to end before it started, which didn't actually work. Um,
Was
it,
that to protect yourself, or was it because you felt like I already know this? Or
I think in some ways it was to protect myself. I think I was running from a lot of things that were, just some of the baggage and some of the heaviness that we carry as African Americans, and some of the baggage and some of the heaviness that I carry as being Gullah Geechee, and just being, in terms of my work, I was so close to that history, but really in the beginning didn't want to embrace it. I didn't want that responsibility. And I'll say that over the years, my teaching has just gotten closer and closer and then been engulfed in many ways by slavery and by the slave trade, despite my best efforts to stay away from it. And what I guess what I realized is that in many ways I had a unique story to tell. And this is why I felt touched, as if the ancestors just kind of said, you know what,
yeah, you're the
we've been
one.
patient.
Yeah.
You're the one, and you need to come on and do this now.
Yes.
And so after years of sort of being desensitized to it,
Mhm.
and teaching it in a way that was very academic and distant from my own experience, to really embrace it and to see it as my responsibility and my calling, if you will,
Mhm.
and really try to lean in to the unique story that I have to tell. And that in and of itself brings its own set of challenges, because it's a topic that can be very emotional, and how do you stand up in front of students and teach through that emotion that I feel each and every time that I read these texts?
Yeah.
And I guess collaborating with artists and being an artist helps me in ways that I didn't understand before you and I met. Um, and so it helps me to embrace that emotion. And I'll give you an example. When I'm writing, sometimes I'm writing or I'm reading and sort of imagining what I'm going to write. I'm outlining, I'm putting the story I'm going to tell together in my mind. And I just break down in tears, and I'm just crying my eyes out over, an enslaved person who found his family or looked for his family or whatever it is.
Mm.
And when I get to that moment, I always say, okay, it's
This is
getting
right.
good now. This is it.
This is it.
This is the emotion that I want to evoke in my audience,
Mhm.
so that they understand what West African captives and enslaved Blacks felt. If we can get to this place, then I can teach. And that's the place I used to run from. That's the place but now I'm going right into it, and I have to put myself in it.
Wow. So I think about putting yourself into it and the stories that you know from West Africa to the eastern coast of the United States, to all of the research you've done about us on plantations and that world. I honestly wonder then, how do you process the world we live in now? How do you process what happened to Ma'Khia Bryant? How do you hold what happened to George Floyd, and that's being right now,
Yeah.
that you're carrying hundreds, thousands of years of history and stories inside of you. Do you have a conscious processing for that? Do you have ritual that you have created that is alive for you for that?
I'll say that it's easier for me to deal with the past than the present.
Yeah.
And I am a very visual person. I haven't watched the news, the network news,
Wow.
in decades. I think I was in graduate school in Miami
Wow.
when I stopped watching the news.
Consciously.
So consciously, I listen to NPR. I'm an NPR addict. I listen to the news all the time, but I can't take those images in my
Yeah. I
those
can't even take them in entertainment anymore.
no,
Like,
I
haven't
was going
been
to
able to
say,
finish watching Small Acts. I haven't been able to finish
no.
watching Judas and the Black Messiah because um, I don't know if I told you this story before, but I used to like have a hunger for violence. Like, I grew up in LA, and I would get this sort of like crazy, weird hunger when people would fight or when there were guns around. And it was a product of all these ingredients of being, where I was growing up, where I was, and what was talked about and what was romanticized and lifted up. But I was in Clifton in Cincinnati, and so there were two sects of skinheads that were fighting. And I watched a skinhead kick another man in the head a couple times, and I turned around and threw up. And it
Mm,
physically, I got physically ill. And since then, my ability to take in any image of human beings hurting physically other
mhm,
human beings is intolerable. So even when it's theatrical in films and stuff, I can't watch it. It's just, for me, the Black body is so, when I see the Black body, I see living, breathing flesh miracle. And
mhm,
it's very difficult for me to watch. And I actually don't watch it because it stays with me for a really long time. It
mhm,
makes it difficult for me to function during a day.
mhm.
And uh, it's crushing. It's really devastating. So, and I don't think it's funny. I don't find it entertaining.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I watch very little television, and that's one of the reasons. I don't need to I have a very difficult time processing those images and just seeing them as images that my mind can let go, because my mind doesn't let go. They play
Yeah.
like movies in my head, and they disturb my ability to just function in a regular business as usual. Um, I do enjoy film, but I'm also very selective in general about violence. I don't watch it. I read it, and maybe it's because I read so much of it in my research and in my teaching that my threshold is just incredibly low. Um, and it just makes me feel very, very heavy. And
Yeah.
so I'm always looking for things that are gonna help me feel light, you
Yeah.
know? What are my rituals? You know, I don't I don't I can't say that I consistently do anything that's different in moments like we are now. Um, I get up every morning, put my feet on the floor, and I talk to my ancestors, you know, and before I go to bed at night, I meditate. And I just
Mhm.
tried to envision the world as I need it and want it to be,
Mhm.
and as it should be. And
Mhm.
really focusing on that
Mm.
versus how it is,
That's
versus getting caught up in, just the drama and the death and, so many the suffering that is happening. Um, and that we as a people and people of color and all marginalized people, you know, LGBTQ, transgender, just right now there's just so much death. If you think about, the people who have died and been brutalized, it's just it's
it's unbearable.
mind-boggling.
It's
Yeah, it
yeah.
really is. And I
I,
think, go
go on.
ahead.
No, go on.
Well, I was just going to say that this was part of why I wanted to write the Requiem. Yeah, I wanted to create something beautiful out of something that is really, really ugly.
Yeah, that's that never stops. You will
Mhm.
never run out of material to transform into beauty.
This is true. This
Yeah.
is very true.
I I experience a kind of grief that is so present that it is, and I've had that sensitivity since I was a child growing up in LA. I remember when people were like dropping from AIDS
Mm,
and disappearing from the neighborhood. And I just would go so deep in my heart, and I would grieve, and I would do my own little, I would bury things in my backyard, even if it was just writing a name on a piece of paper, or if it was like, if I had a special little friendship bracelet that I had worn for a long time that had been close to my skin, that had been hearing my pulse and on my wrist, and I would take it and I would bury it in the ground, and I would say a person's name, and I would think about, and I would think a lot about how precious it is to be alive, and how like I would have these sort of moments of like euphoric ecstasy when I was a child, and I would be like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and I would feel like this thrumming life inside of me that would rise up, and it would swell, and I would cry, and I would be at school on the bus, and I would look at people, and I would, and teachers would be like, "What's wrong?" And I'd be like, "Nothing, but we're alive. Can you believe this? We're here, we're alive." I would have these like huge moments of like euphoria around having a heartbeat and being
mm,
warm. And I would hold the cat to my ear because I was like, "Oh my God, the cat is alive." And that euphoria that I experienced in the being aliveness of being human would gut me when somebody would be taken,
mm,
when somebody was taken unjustly, and it would gut me, and I would have to have a way to connect that beauty high of life to the beauty of the person's life who was lost, and sort of speak to the injustice of the stealing, of the taking, of the snatching them from the holiness of being human and being alive. And it is really something that um it stuns me, sometimes when I think about making work, when I think about being in, when I well not when I think about when I am in my studio, when I was making the altars, and and things were, I worked, those altars have been in progress in my studio for 7 months before they went into the show. And thinking about Requiem for Rice and the conversations that we had about the language you cry in, or about how we've contended with death in the past, and also making these works and making them as protective spirits, making them to making them as loudspeakers to the glory and the brilliance of, and the wonder that exists in being alive and falling in love and raising kids and being in nature, and to make these works that are like affirmative loudspeakers of that glory, while also having to hold the devastation. And then also we're allowing myself to process through fear inside of them, because I think about Sandra Bland, and I think about how she was going to get some heels or some lipstick, and for her new job, she was preparing to enter this new job in this new world, and it was just a day. It was just a day in her car. And I think about like processing that, like unclenching any place of fear from inside of me in my practice, so that I don't carry that into the world, that thought that it was just a day. It was just a day going someplace and then never again. And I know that I ask a lot of my art practice. I ask a lot of protection. I ask a lot of safety. And it's the clearest channel that I have to being in conversation with my ancestors. Otherwise, my head goes a lot. There's a lot of puppies around me, so y'all might hear, hi, Babbitt. And then one of my dogs is snoring next to me, so you might hear that also. But there's that. I know that I ask a lot of my practice. I ask it to hold me and to keep me alive, and I look for life-sustaining ingredients in other artworks. Like I hear it. I love listening to the Requiem. I love it. It makes so much sense to my bones inside of me. The vibration that I feel in those crescendos, it makes perfect sense to me. It is a complete language speaking to my bones, from the bones to the sky. And it is a vibration that gives voice to things inside of me. There is no language for that. So I can ride the music. I can ride the orchestration, and it is a vehicle for me. It is an ingredient of liberation for me. And I listened to the interviews with some of the musicians in the video, and when I heard them talk about how personal making that music was for them, and how they were asking a lot of that music too. They were asking that music to open them up, to heal them, to speak to their ancestors. And that's something that I am so grateful to not be afraid to give myself permission to do, to ask the work to do work.
That is amazing. And I feel as if, as always, Vanessa.
How do you feel right now? Tell me how you feel.
Oh, I'm about to cry.
The whole time I have felt like that. I took a deep breath and I was like, oh man, it's the beginning of the conversation and I'm about to cry.
And we're just getting started.
Yeah, just getting started. But, recognizing also that there's a cry inside of me that just needs, there's a cry inside of me. And listening, because they were playing the music as we were waiting to come on. And I was like, oh, man. And I was like, oh, please. I was singing over it, and I just, it was it's a lot for me. It's a lot for me. I think about, I took somebody to see the installation and I was like, yeah, here. And they were like, it's so beautiful. It's overwhelming. And I was like, well, it didn't bring anybody back to life. So it's great. but there's like, I mean, sometimes I really need, I ask a lot of the work, and I know that like making something beautiful is an ingredient to a daily liberation that allows the soul to breathe and the body to be present and grounded. But in some ways, I just want to make an artwork that is so powerful, it just stops the police from killing people. Like I could make a single artwork that just comes into the world and it's like, done. There's no more. For real, that's what I think. I'm like, what is that work of art? What is that symphony? What is that installation? What can I bring forth right now so I never have to be a Makia Bryan again, that I never have to, no more Breonna Taylor, never. There's just one artwork that can come and like slam down the entire sky and we're all free in a way that I think about that. I really do. Like I mine my soul for that, and not in a place of responsibility, not in a place where it's like, oh, people are like, yo, Vanessa, you're an activist and an artist. What are you doing? Not like that. Like I have this responsibility like that, but because I really, really, really want to live in a world where the police don't kill people. I really, really, really want to live in the world where we like stop making the world stops making these like dumbass excuses for police who kill people. And I was like, and sometimes I hear them, they were like, well, the officer was afraid for his life. And I was like, maybe he's in the wrong job. You know, I was like, if he can't think well, you know, I think that all the time. I was like, this is not good work for you. You got to go do another job. But I really want to live free from that. I every day I do this wild obsessive thing where I check CNN to see which Black person the police somewhere. And the thing is, I realize it doesn't always make national news.
No, it doesn't often.
National news.
No, not at all.
I really want to live. I want us to collectively come together and make an artwork that is the ultimate sky mic drop of artworks that makes our tomorrow instantly clean in that air. Yes.
The thing that you said that just touched me so deeply was asking the work to do work. And that is not something that I have done. And in many ways, I feel as if I have to do the work. And I'm so exhausted. You know, I am so exhausted in so many ways, you know, and on top of just COVID and all of the changes that COVID has brought, trying to bring forth the work, it's been a lot, you know. So asking the work to do work.
Asking the work to do work. Asking the work to do work.
Okay.
And being intentional and precise. They're being intentional and precise, and then also opening up the broadest door possible for the work to show you what work it has to do, right? Because there's some ways that you're going to be able, there's some things that you're going to need from the work. There's some ways that you're going to be able to direct the purpose of the work to do work. But then this work is soulful. So it's layers upon layers upon layers. It's many bodies and many bodies of stories. And so the work has a purpose that it is revealing in the weight of its dimensions and of its layers, and just to inside of that meditative practice to say, I am opening up the door for the work to show me what work it has to do, and to remove any obstacles. It removes any obstacles, and also prevent me from being an obstacle. So much of, like, when I work on a body of work in my studio, the first piece of it, the first work from a new body of work is just jacked up. It's just me like I can see fear, expectation. I can see a little bit of me just trying to be clever and witty and get over on some stuff. And I have to use that first work in a body of work to attend to the places of obstacle and fear that want to sort of derail or throw off opening up that space of dimensional purpose inside of my body and inside the practice, so that the work can do work. And the work always has something to do for me, right? It is doing something for me. And it is, and there are ways that there's no therapeutic device that is as precise and profound as being alive inside of my own practice without fear.
Mm.
Yeah. And I like when you say that you're exhausted in so many ways,
Mhm.
how do you rest? How do you fuel yourself? You know, because we were talking about, right, the book that you're writing right now, and people are like, how do you write a 400-page book? And you're like, that one page at a time that is
Yes.
in that is in relationship with that exhaustion, every word.
Yeah.
What is that for you?
You know, I think this may be one of the silver linings of COVID, that I have learned how to take care of myself and how to make time for myself. And the fact that I can't work and just keep working without nurturing myself.
Mhm. I think a
A-
lot about nurturing right now.
And I nurture, you know, my whole family, but who's going to nurture me, right? So,
We gotta come back to that. Who's gonna nurture me? We're gonna come. That's very serious. I think that
yes.
that is a very serious. That's a very serious question. That's a very serious thing. I feel like for Black women on this land today to
Mhm.
address intentionally who's going to nurture me, who is going
Mhm.
to nourish
Yep.
me.
Yep.
Yeah. So go on.
Exactly.
Okay, we're gonna connect that.
So, sleeping more than I have slept in a very long time, in
Decades,
decades.
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 I feel that.
Walking, just being outside in nature
Mm,
and taking long walks and appreciating the flowers and the squirrels and the snow and whatever is around me. And so doing that and doing it intentionally, and
yes,
especially say if I'm doing a writing retreat, to build time to hike. I love hiking. Um, that is really important to keeping my soul and my brain nourished.
yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
reading. I'm not reading as much as I should, but I'm reading more than I have. And when I say reading, I read all the time for research and for teaching, but just reading to nourish myself is something that I've been doing that I enjoy tremendously, and it helps to put back what everything else takes out. And just appreciating artwork, just being nourished by art and by artists is also something that has become really important to me. So I'm learning, and the biggest thing I guess is to take the time to do it, because not to burn the candle from both ends and expect to be able to just keep doing that, you know, without, if you make a fire and you continue to, it's going to run out of fuel. So I've
Yeah.
got to keep putting fuel into the fire so that I can keep doing all the things I need and want to do.
Yes. I had really started to think and deal with like really old wounds in my heart and in my soul. And like one of my most original wounds is this place of like feeling worthless and feeling, feeling worthless, and contending with all of the different ways that I've tried to like pump up and perform my own value and really present externally that I'm a valuable person, and then wait for this sort of external energy to come back towards me and validate that. I had to deal with that a lot in my life, and, you know, through all these stages in the past couple of weeks. And I really had to like give my heart permission to say, like, I really need to be receptive of the love and the nurturing that's coming towards me from people who love me. Like, I think that I have not been able to easily at all believe people when they've said that they love me or care about me. And so I had this conversation about how unsustainable that is, and how I will not be able to continue forward and growing and substantiating my wholeness without having an honest conversation about receiving the love that is alive and awake for me in the world around, and then asking of that love the same way that I ask of art, that I ask the work to do work. Because you know, sometimes I would just be moving so fast and have had the experience so much where I would be let down from people who said they love you, care about you, nurture you. And so I would just be like, I love, care, and nurture for myself. And then I would run on that. But I was like, recently I was like, oh, no, it doesn't work like that. You have to, it is a circle. It is a circle of care. And I was sort of took a big chunk of pie out the circle and had to have an honest conversation with myself about that. I was in Brooklyn when the Chauvin trial verdict came through, and I was with Ola from the Free Black Women's Library, and we started to hear all these horns honking outside, and Ola pokes her head outside of this Jamaican juice joint that we're at. She's like, what is happening outside? Something is happening outside. And right then on the radio, they start reading these charges, and an old Black man came in and he said, the verdict is in. And I had this moment where I like turned my head a little bit, and I choked this sob out of my mouth. I was like, ugh, ugh. And then I sat with it for a moment, and any little relief that I felt, it disappeared. Like I felt this tiny pinch of, thank God I don't have to fly to Minneapolis and with my gas mask, right? But then it had gone away. It went away, and I didn't know what had happened in Columbus until later on, but it was so close that I was like, oh, I wonder if I caught the spirit breeze of that, and just like held a different line inside of myself. But realistically, I have, even in the loving that I receive from other people, it is this place of me needing to be able to say out loud, I did not know this person. I did not know this little girl, but I am devastated. And I like my partner has had to just hold me so much, just so much holding while I sob, because I can feel the power of their life, and I can feel it being gone. And I have made so many sculptures. I've made so many sculptures to protect our bodies, to protect our imaginations, to protect our spirit, to open up doorways of freedom, to create landscapes of peace for us. And I realized that I do it sometimes with such a loving desperation. I am so desperate inside of that loving, creative work. But that if I didn't have it, I don't know I don't know if I wasn't an artist, how I would bear being awake in this world. But one of the things I'm thinking about is new rituals.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about new rituals, and I'm thinking about, how we invited in the installation people to sit on the bench and listen to the requiem and listen to the sound, and honoring that listening and listening to yourself is one of the rituals. It is a way to not just go into dissociative, like a dissonance and separating yourself from what happened. Like that could never happen here. That could never happen to me. And to just to invite people to feel the ritual of feeling, moving, the sensation of that inside of their body. But if I wasn't an artist, if I didn't have a studio, I don't know how I would manage.
Mhm. Mhm. Because then how do you process the grief? How do you move through it? How do you not how do you stop it from just completely engulfing you?
I I I think about how when there are these big tragedies in other countries overseas, how they have these mourning periods. Like there's this like countrywide acknowledgement of shared grief. And because the life or the lives were so valuable that we're going to call this grief together. And you do not have to go to work. Money isn't as important right now as us saying, going to a quiet place, wherever it's in your home or whatever, but that sort of massive scale of acknowledging the acknowledging the loss as an entire nation. And I think about that has always been so powerful to me when I watch other countries do that, whether it's they had victims from a plane crash or a boat sank, or, a bunch of people, something happened, but they say together, in our humanity together, we mourn. And the lack of that in this country around what happens to Black lives
Mhm. Mhm.
is like criminal to me.
Mhm.
It's really painful. It's really painful that very quickly there become discussions about what somebody did or what they deserved. And but it's happening on the scale of, there's such an accumulation of names that we could have a year of mourning in this
Mhm.
country. We could
Mhm.
have a year of mourning where there's a special flag that flies from the state houses. There's special flags that fly, and we take up a new form of ritual in processing as the reparations bill tries to make its way, through again. There can be, you know what? And I feel like I sound ridiculous. I feel like I sound like a ridiculous romantic artist saying that we could have collective mourning around what happens with Black lives and the lives of people of color, in a place that is slowly awakening to slowly awakening into how powerful and necessary an actual reckoning is. And I don't know, maybe that needs to be your next opera. No, look at me putting it on you. Look at me putting it. But just that you could come out with this opera, come out with this work that would be taken up by symphonies and musicians all over the country and played, and that enters us into an official duration of reckoning, some of which is grief, some of which is the uplifting of stories that have been submerged and names that have been submerged. But I believe that there is an artwork at the scale of this reckoning.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's on you, Edda. I'm just kidding.
It's, this was one of the genesis of the Requiem, because when have Black lives been mourned? Going back to the Middle Passage, and the forced removal of captives from West Africa and their forced transport to the New World, and the millions of people who perished in that forced voyage that were never mourned.
I think about how not only am I recognizing, as you're saying, when have Black lives ever been mourned? And the massive amount of lives that there are to be mourned.
Mm-hmm.
I am thinking about the ways that I was taught in elementary school, like during Black History Month, about slavery, and how there was always this sneaky underlying current that this was what was supposed to happen, or this is what is, like, what did you expect would happen to Black people? Or there was this weird undercurrent of like, this was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And never did it. And it was sneaky. There was a sneaky value judgment in the ways that I learned about the slave trade and about enslaved Africans in America, that there was this obviousness, this of courseness, this sort of way that it was like, what did you expect? Did you expect that they would be whole people? It was weird, but it also really undermined my ability to form a strong sense of self, like the ways that I learned about that,
Mm-hmm.
that there was like this way that there was like co-signing these ideas about Black deficiency, Black inherent deficiency, that that was really sneaky in my early education. It was really, the anti-Blackness was like spread out like mayonnaise. It was just so sneakily in all these nooks and crannies. And I have to pick it out of myself. I have to find, like, I dig it out of wherever I find it. But I don't always, sometimes I dig it out with such sorrow, and I dig it out with such like internal judgment, that I have carried certain ideas. Like, I have a Black puppy. When the Black puppy was born, I was like, oh my God, that puppy's gonna have such a hard life. And I'm like, and I felt so bad that I thought about this for this Black puppy. And I'm like, I want to dig this thing out of me. And it from that place of having found so many slippery, sneaky, suspicious nooks and crannies where anti-Blackness was hiding, there's such a leap to coming to a place where Black lives are mourned. So that's a big distance.
It's a big leap. Yeah.
Big leap. Yeah.
It's a very big leap.
Yeah.
It is. It has never happened, and now with all of the police killings and with COVID, I mean, I really think that we need to mourn. And I think the lack of mourning is going to be something that's going to be very detrimental once the lockdowns are over and people are coming back together and we're actually seeing the empty chairs at the table, right? Not just boxes on Zoom, but actually
Mourning
seeing
is
them.
going to catch us.
Yeah, I think it's going to catch us. And at the same time, if you think about, I said the transatlantic slave trade, I think about slavery, and the numbers of people, for example, who died on rice plantations, right? The second highest death rates in the New World, only second to sugar plantations in the Caribbean. If you think about lynching, and the numbers of people who were lynched in this country, when have Black lives been mourned? We
And
need a
that's something that really
collective
stood out to me.
mourning.
It was like, I would always wonder, why aren't we mourning this?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we saying we have sorrow? Like,
That's
why aren't
right.
we calling that? I'm sorry, it is 8 o'clock, Edda. We talked ourselves through an hour very quickly. Very, very quickly. But we have, so if I thank you, everybody who's been here with us in respecting the time that we have together. I want to know, like, if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A. And you can also, I am going to answer this one question that somebody says, VG, your sculptures provide the altars for the rituals, making us pause, giving space for the sacred. How can we integrate more of a sense of pause and sacredness into our culture? Oh, our culture. Like, do you mean American culture? What do you mean by our? That's one of the things I'm thinking about. But as human beings, how can we integrate more, thank you, more of a
American.
sense of pause and sacredness into our culture? Wow, integrate more of a sense of pause and sacredness into our culture. I don't know that you're going to be able to do that in American culture. I think that there's got to be a centering and a recognition inside of your own humanity. I don't know how do you define American culture? For me, American culture centers a lot just around money and the value of capital, and capital being more valuable than other human beings. So I actually would, you look at, I don't know, Edda, how would you answer that question? But for me, as a human being, there is a deep listening and being in connection to your resonant feeling places. I feel like one of the tenets of American culture is fearlessness, is actually not feeling things. And sort of externalizing your feeling into media. Like, you can feel through watching people fall in love on television or fight on television, but there's a way that inside of your human technology, inside of the technology of your heart and the invisible parts of yourself connecting with your physical senses, that you can be in intentional relationship with that. And some of it can be just asking yourself, asking the feeling parts of yourself to turn up their volume, asking the volume of your heart to awaken and turn up its perceivers to the human world and to the living world around you. I experience a lot of American culture as being really loud and really, really fast and really money centered and centered not around human beings and human technology. But there, for me, it is very important for me to feel things and to give that feeling, to honor feeling and to not hide from it and to not think that it is embarrassing. Or I was in meetings last week with people I was in a meeting with a person who was telling me a story about being with Jacob Lawrence when they died, and holding Jacob Lawrence's hand and the size of his hand and the length of his fingers. And she started to cry. And she was like, oh, forgive me, I'm so stupid. Like, I shouldn't, like, why am I crying? I was like, oh my God, you were with Jacob Lawrence when he passed. Like, I would forever cry in those memories. Like, you waited with him for hours until he took his last breath. This is honorable. This is sacred. Like, I honor that. And I don't co-sign diminishing any of those emotions. And so I think there's something about giving feeling space, especially in the public realm, and not apologizing for showing up with your grief when there's grief in the world. We apologize a lot for feeling in American culture, I find. But that's how I would answer that question.
And I would add that, you know, American culture is this amorphous thing over which few people have control. I would think that our rituals start with our families and with our friends, and however we define family, it's the coming together of like-minded and like-hearted people, um, where we really have to create our own rituals. We have to create our own ways to memorialize and to sort of instill values that are important to us. Um, and then we have to share them. We have to share them with other people. Um, and so, yeah, I think it starts on a much smaller level. And then maybe we can build up.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I'm looking at, I think, well, Edda, how do you feel about taking 2 more questions?
2 more sounds good.
All right, let's look at this. This is what Celeste says. Hi, Celeste, I love you. This conversation has let me experience more of what it's like to come to know how we can use one another to grieve and use art as a way to feel liberated and continue fighting for justice so you can keep breathing. How can this be enough when there's so much to be done?
Mm,
Oh, wow. I was a hospice volunteer when I lived in Los Angeles. I've always been interested in death and interested in how American culture holds death and the different stories that we tell each other about death. And when I was a hospice volunteer, we were trained in how to, if we're with a family and their person is in hospice and somebody comes to you and says, like, is my father dying? We would respond to what's happening exactly right then with whoever's in the room. And we would say, your father's breathing right now. And you would say what was happening, unless it was active death. And I think about how the reality is there is so much to be done, but we are moving at the scale of humans. So we are moving with each other. We are moving in community. And those movements of social healing, those movements of holding space for grief and for reckoning and for the deep breathing that comes after you've had a big cry, that can happen infectiously at the scale of your neighborhood and infectiously at the scale of 2 or 3 people, like how Edda just said. You have this ritual with friends or with families, and then you share it. And I really feel that it is a powerful vehicle to invite people into new rituals of grieving and healing and reckoning, and saying that you did that, and saying that you did that on purpose, and saying that you needed it, and inviting people out loud to say, we did this here. Like when after the Pulse nightclub massacre, we set lanterns to the sky and said everybody's name, and a whole bunch of people came, and it was what we needed to do. And inside of that, there was so much permission given to anybody to make any space available for that. And I think about that question, Celeste, and the power of eye contact, and how when you're making eye contact, you're really only looking at one other person at a time. And that is, and that is where you can move powerfully and intentionally in that, and then grow it and share it, because it's not on us all to do everything, but we also have to recognize, like, you're a very powerful human being, and your life will have power beyond your ability to engineer or to manipulate an outcome.
Mhm. I think that's beautiful, and I agree wholeheartedly. And in many ways, those are things that I'm perfecting. I'm learning. I
Yeah.
don't have to do everything. you know.
Yeah, I love, like, I remember, you know, how peaceful I felt when I started telling myself that I can do,
Mhm.
I get to do what I can do. I don't have to do everything.
Right.
And
Right.
that feels good. All
Mhm.
right, this is our last question. Is from Dawn. Deepest appreciation and safety and wellness to you and your close ones, Vanessa and Dr. Edda Fields Black. How do we as artists and educators that sometimes work with museums, educational institutions that perpetuate the violence, erasure, and injustice that we seek to heal and undo with our work, building protocols of accountability within these institutions? Well, you know the protocols of accountability that you want. Like, I don't show up, I don't let institutions just tell me what to do anymore. I say, like, this is what I want. This is how I need to be present. This is what safety is for me. And this is what love is with me. Like, I talk about love with institutions. I say, it is loving for me to be able to give 100 free family memberships to your institution. It is loving for you to make certain that I am safe in these ways here. So I talk about institutional courage. But then I also am really clear when I experience violence in institutions where I'm showing work or performing. I, I don't do professional silence. I don't do like silence that makes institutions comfortable. I don't do that anymore. It's very difficult to sleep doing that. So
Yeah.
uh, I say things out loud, and I ask the institution to be courageous in ways that maybe they haven't before, because institutions are repetitive. They're just like repeat the same systems, the same kinds of programming, the same kinds of things. And um, I have had like, I have experienced so much pain and humiliation and disrespect and denigration in institutions that say they just had their DEI workshop. They're like, that's one of the, oh my God, that's, yeah. So when they're in that place, I have experienced a lot of pain and that, and so there are ways that I had to have conversations with myself on the back end in my studio and be like, how can I stop this from happening? And so when I meet with institutions, when I do site visits, I let them know what's important to me. And I say, where does this plug in with what you have? And if you don't have it, make these moves so that I can be here and do this. I ask a lot of institutions. I really do, because I don't, it, it can be so painful.
Mhm. And
And I don't want to do that anymore.
you give a lot. So you're asking a lot, but you're also giving a tremendous amount.
It is, yeah, it is a true thing. And it can be exhausting, but it's also really joyful. And I make sure that my experience with institutions has joy as a part of it, and that there's delight as a part of that experience also. But I definitely show up to institutions and call them out or call them in. I call them in to their mission. Sometimes I'll be like, isn't this your mission? How is this? This is, so what I just experienced is the opposite of your mission. And what are we going to do about this? And so I call them into themselves. And sometimes it's just like reminding people their mission. Oh, I looked up your mission. This is what it says. And, but this is what my experience was. And I ask them to be courageous in different ways and to think about, is it possible for them to be loving? Do people actually feel safe in that space? And things that can make, ways that I've felt unsafe in spaces, and how we can make space for people to be safe. Edda, do you want to say a goodbye?
Thank you so much, Vanessa. This has been a joy. And I look forward to the day when we will be sitting in the kitchen or on the porch or in your garden or in the park or somewhere together in person, having one of our long talks.
Yes, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for saying yes when I texted you about Requiem for Writing. And it is an honor to watch you be alive in the world and to see how much power and how much soul and how much medicine moves through your life and moves through your work. It is it is a way that I know that we will be okay. How can we hear the opera? Someone asks. Edda.
Well, it's not an opera, but you can hear the symphonic work, the first 3 movements. Is it on the Frick's website? I know it's on the Requiem for Rice website. You can also Google WQED. It's on.
It is on the Frick's website, and
Okay.
I can put a link into the chat. It's part of the
Great.
exhibition page as well.
Wonderful. I was actually on the website today and I was like, ooh, I'm happy to see that.
We can do a follow-up message to everybody who is a part of this program for your blog posts to read more about Requiem for Rice and how the project came about and how it relates to the music. Thank you both so very much. You're phenomenal, tremendous. We're so honored and lucky to have both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Noni, Susan, Mark. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Edda. I love you. Everybody
Thank
be
you,
well
Vanessa.
and be
I
safe.
love you too. Be
and
safe.
inspired. All right.
Take
Bye, y'all.
care. Bye-bye.